All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to another installment of the Modern Day Podcast. You didn't ask for it, but we're giving it to you anyway. Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. You can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/moderndayjames. There's over 180,000 titles for you to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. This episode is also brought to you by Skillshare. It's a wonderful website. You can use my promotion link, skl.sh/moderndayjames. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, you just have to write that down or memorize it if you have a really good memory. It's also brought to you by my patrons. They're really awesome. You can subscribe on Patreon for art lessons and all other good stuff. Check that out. And as I mentioned, this will be available on Spotify and iTunes afterwards. Today, we are humbly welcoming our guest, Mr. Nick Gindraux. How you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. So for those who might not know, why don't you give a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Nick Gindraux. I'm a concept artist or illustrator. I work in games and movies. Currently, I'm working for 20th Century Fox. But before that, I was at Naughty Dog for quite a bit of time. Awesome.
Yeah, how did you get started into all this? Let's go as far back early as possible. When you started drawing, how did you experience that? How did you start drawing?
Let's see. I mean, as a kid, I've always liked it, but I never knew, I never really considered it seriously. Probably until, I don't know, maybe I was 18 years old, after high school, or during maybe after high school when I was graduating. Actually, I never really considered doing art at all.
Yeah.
I was gonna go to I think UC Riverside, like a university, doing business.
Okay.
And I didn't even know what that meant, at that age. And I was like, well, I guess, everybody's going to college. So I guess, and that was one of the only universities that had accepted me. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going here.
I actually love that because I feel like so many people just go to school for business, which is a really amorphous thing to do. It's like, I'm just going for business, whatever that means.
Just some general business.
Right. But, and it's really weird because when you graduate high school, it's I feel like we're just too naive, or maybe I was too naive to really know how the world actually works, and it's only until now where I'm like, oh, now I feel like maybe I'd be ready to go to business school 10 years later, now that I have a better understanding of how, how money works and how money moves and, things like that. So it's looking back 10 years, I'm like, whoa, what was I thinking?
Yeah,
I had
really
no idea. Yeah, it's I had no idea at all.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's here, this kid who's bankrupt pretty much because you have no money as a child.
Right.
And they're like, just go to school for managing money, essentially.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I was going to do that. And I remember I actually failed my calculus class. And it was during a time where I was like, it wasn't a thing where it's I wasn't doing my work. I just really didn't understand it. And I was getting tutoring and everything. And I was like, dude, and I realized I don't know if I'm cut out for this at all. And it wasn't until one of my cousins was really into film. And I found out he was kind of looking at film schools. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I can do, I don't know, art.
Yeah.
And at the time there were all these commercials for the Art Institute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was 2008, right after the market crashed. And I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? And, cause my parents are getting kind of strapped, and things like that. They had some investments and then I had to really seriously think about, where am I going to go to school?
Yeah.
And I kind of made a last minute decision and I was like, well, I see all these commercials. I guess I'll go to this AI school.
Yeah.
And when I went there, I guess they're it was the administration or something like that, just to find more out about the school. They were ready to sign me up right when I was like, oh, I just want to look. And they're like, oh no, we'll get you into the early program. And I'm like, what's the early program? They're like, oh, it's this great thing where, you get to finish a semester early. And I'm like, wow, and
one semester.
I know, exactly. And I'm like, but it's when you're 18, it's you don't know any better. So it's So I'm like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, let's get this started. Like, let's get my future going. And I mean, he even picked my major out and everything. Like, he picked it.
Wow.
Like, because I didn't know. I was like, well, you know, like, well, what do you like? And I'm like, well, I like, you know, like animated movies are pretty cool. You know, games are pretty cool. And he was like, oh yeah, you know, you look like the type of guy that would like the animation track. And I'm like, yeah, like, that would be great. And so anyway, this guy like picked my fate.
Okay, wow.
Nice.
Yeah, and like maybe I have everything to owe to that guy. I don't know.
It's the one time that actually worked out well, where you just
Yeah.
let somebody else choose what you're gonna be doing.
Yeah, yeah, and like, dude, I had like the worst portfolio too, and like AI, like, cause there were other schools. There's like Otis and there's Art Center,
Yeah.
and there was no way that I was gonna get into any of those schools because
Okay.
my portfolio at the time were just like I was copying like pictures in the magazine. Like I drew a charcoal portrait of Johnny Depp, and it was so bad.
That's great.
And I wish I still had it. I actually lost that
That's great.
portfolio.
That's a shame.
At my
Oh,
high
no.
school. I like left it in a classroom or something and like never saw it again. I wish I had them because it was like the worst stuff you could ever
Are you
see.
sure that's not just the story you tell everybody publicly, that you left it in high school?
Yeah,
Are
exactly.
you sure that's not lingering around somewhere?
I know, so that nobody finds it. But no, it is out there. It's out there somewhere. But
yeah, my first portfolio was garbage too.
yeah.
I didn't draw Johnny Depp, but it was garbage.
Yeah, I mean, because when you're in high school, you don't even, or at least for myself, I had no idea what art really was, you know.
Yeah.
And like, you know, when you look at, you know, like old master paintings, I guess it's like, oh well, that's something they did back then, and
Yeah.
you think that it's like this weird linear thing where it's like, oh, I guess art is past that or something, but really it's like, no, art is whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have an idea of what, you know, art was when I was 18. But anyways, so once this guy picked my major, he's like, we'll get you started in like 2 weeks. I was like, what? 2 weeks? Oh, that's great. I'm going to get started during the summer.
Yeah.
That's going to be awesome. Like right out of high school.
Wow.
And so anyway, I started, and it was only until then that I was like taking these classes and then started doing more research on my own, where it's like, oh my God, like what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
You know, because like I was taking these drawing classes and I was like pretty bad, you know, and I was looking at other students, you know, they were a little bit better, and I was like, okay, well, you know, I gotta do this now.
Yeah.
So there's no turning back.
Now you're here, you're going to be doing it, and you have to just commit at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I ended up just you know, I was like practicing, and I ended up really, really enjoying it. You know, and we had like all these still life classes, and you know, and like that's probably the way you should start, right?
Yeah.
And like it's like, okay, like here's a box, like let me draw the box, and you know, just drawing from observation, and you know, not developing too many bad habits, I
Yeah.
guess. So you know, that was good. And yeah, I ended up doing that, and it wasn't until like I started like doing more research into like, you know, professionals in the actual industries that I wanted to work at.
Yeah.
You know, because I was like, oh, like me, you know, and like I should start looking up other people that are doing this, you know, and then so I saw people from, you know, like animation houses, like, you know, all the people from Disney, and looking at the work that they were doing, and looking at people in games and all the work that, and I was like, I don't even know where to start. Like, how do you even
Yeah.
do that? Because a lot of the work, I mean, it wasn't even that long ago, but you know, it was like half traditional and like half digital, you know, where you had
Yeah.
like Nathan Folks, or like Sam Mitchlap, you know, like doing things in like gouache and like acrylic. And it was like, well, I don't know, am I supposed to do that, or am I supposed to do digital? And yeah, and then also I was looking up other students too, you know, like, because at AI, like the only thing I had to judge was like my class, you
Yeah.
know, and it's like until you go like one level beyond that, and it's like, okay, well, what are these kids at Art Center doing?
Yeah.
And I remember I was on conceptart.org.
Oh, the classic.
Yeah, and I remember I posted something on there in like the finished section, and it was so bad, and I put it up there, and I was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, it's finished. Like I don't know what else it would be, because it's, you know, it's like I put a lot of time into it.
Yeah.
And I put it up there and it got like so ripped apart.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
like all these people are like, this does not deserve to be in this section.
Wow.
Like people like
Sounds
up in
like
arms,
it.
like this is terrible. And I was like, oh man, like, and I felt so shameful. I was
Oh my
like, why
God.
did I do that?
But sometimes I feel like that shame sometimes helps you to push you further, because you're like, wow, I don't want that to happen again. I don't want the conceptart.org people to.
Right.
I
Well,
think
you
it
know,
also helps you get over shame in general.
Oh,
and then you
totally.
can, like move forward.
yeah, totally. Because I was like, well, I got that out of the way, and it's like, and after that, I was like, you know, whatever. It's like yeah, it was bad. Like I looked at it and I was like, well, you know, it is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's like you compare it to all the other stuff on that board.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's like, it might sound mean, but I was looking at my thing. I'm like, well, yeah, it actually doesn't deserve to be like, you know, compared to all this other stuff. But since then, I kind of like put conceptart.org like away. I was like, you know what, like, this isn't for me right now. I'm like not even ready to like put anything online. Like, what am I doing? So I just kind of like was focusing on my classes. But anyway, that's where I saw, there was an artist, a few art center students, I think Danny Gardner and Robert Simons, and I think Peggy Chung, and like all these like art center kids started posting all their work from their first or second semester at art center.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I was like, dude, it was so professional. I was like it was so good that they could have just been working right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I was like, who are these kids? Like,
They probably took classes before going to college.
yeah, so
too.
I found out that they like took all these drawing classes
Mhm.
at PCC, which is Pasadena City College.
Okay.
And they were taking some like art center courses for high school kids when they were in high school. So it's like I was already like years behind, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess art center is like the place to go. And at the time, so I think it was like I was 2 years into Art Institute, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know if I want to finish Art Institute. And I actually took a trip to Art Center with the portfolio a new portfolio that I made at the Art Institute. And I was like, okay, well, you know, I'll show them all this new stuff that I did.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm like, let's see what happens. So, you know, I go over there, and I guess a counselor, another admissions person, you know, like looks at the portfolio, and it was a totally different experience. Whereas like, you know, when I went to AI, they're like, oh yeah, like right this way, like
Yeah.
please, like get started. And then I get into this admissions office, and he looked at the portfolio and he's like, yeah, sorry, you're going to have to come back in like a year. And I'm like,
Oh.
what do you mean?
no.
And he's
Oh,
like,
no.
it's not up to par. I'm like, okay, like
Wow.
I guess it's not, you know. And like I looked, and then when I compared it to all these other students, I'm like, well, he's right. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to lie to myself. It's like, it wasn't good. So that's when I decided. And actually when I was at the Art Institute, toward the end of like my second year, Shadi Safadi started teaching there. And
cool.
so I took his class, and I was like, oh man, like this guy from Naughty Dog is teaching at my school. I was like, I have to take this class.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking the class, and I loved it, you know. And then he was like a really, really honest teacher, and he was someone that, you know, came from, you know, the business, and,
Yeah.
and really like gave me a good idea of like what to expect and, you know, what to learn. So yeah, Shadi was like a really big part in kind of changing my direction.
Okay.
And so after that I was like, okay. And he was like, yeah, if there's any other school to go to, he's like, you should go to Art Center. And I was like, okay. But, you know, I mean, things might have changed since then. You know, it's like I wouldn't know what to recommend
it's like
now,
now, yeah.
because it's like everybody has their own way of finding where they want to end up. So
Yeah,
that was just
definitely.
for me. But anyway, he was like, yeah, you should go there. And I was like, yeah, but they told me to like come back in a year. And he's like, so come back in a year. And I was like, oh, right. Like
Yeah.
I could do that. And I was living with my parents, so I didn't have to worry about, you know, like living on my own and paying rent or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
That
you know,
helps.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think an important part was I was able to like dedicate most of my time just to be a student, you know,
Yeah.
because it's always hard when you see kids who are, you know, it's like you have a part-time job because you need to, you know, pay for your apartment,
Yeah.
but at the same time you're trying to work on your portfolio.
It's so tough, and I have that issue with students too, where they'll be not that issue, but just they'll be working, and it takes them away from practice or doing anything on their artwork, because it's so difficult to try to manage a living situation while also trying to improve, which is just a full-time job in itself.
Yeah, totally. And like it's really good to have that focus, right? So, you know, I mean, maybe I would recommend, like, you know, if you only want to work on being a student, like, yeah, like move back in with your parents.
Yeah.
Like I like my parents,
Yeah.
so it's not an issue. Like, I know some students have, like, you know, they might have a different relationship with their parents.
Relationship with them.
Yeah, but I mean, thankfully, like me and
Yeah.
my parents would get along, and you know, it was fine.
I think that's a common thing. I did the same thing. I moved back home with my family, just practiced all day, treated it like a full-time job, and then eventually it started going from there. So I think it's helpful, like
Totally.
almost a necessary step for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And so after that 2 years of Art Institute, I was like, okay, well, like, I don't want to keep wasting money and you know, buying classes that I don't really enjoy. So I took a year off. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just learn on my own.
Yeah.
And started taking CDA classes, concept design. Like, oh my God, like I've never seen this kind of information, you know, being provided by, you know, AI, or at least where I was.
Yeah.
I know they're all different, but it was a nice contrast. So I was like, okay, well, I think I'm, you know, in the right direction.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
having a good teacher makes all the difference.
Oh, totally. Yeah, because they give you the guidance that you just wouldn't acquire otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, that's why all my students aren't going anywhere, because they have a terrible teacher.
No, I'm sure it's fine.
Your poor brother. I'm sorry for him.
No, I think he enjoyed the class, but
I hope so.
yeah, he I guess, yeah, my brother, he's been doing a lot of like 3D stuff, and I'm actually going to him now for like 3D questions. I'm like, dude, like, how do you, you know, do this in Marvelous? And he's like, oh yeah, and he'll just like know what to do already. I'm like, damn, like, okay.
That's so cool.
You already know what's up.
Awesome.
That's so great. So what ended up happening? Did you end up going into Art Center eventually?
Yeah, so
I
like
hope
a year went by, and I was like doing a lot of studying on my own. Like, we were painting outside. Like, I ended up we started this thing, and I think Eitan mentioned it in the other podcast, where we would go out and paint every Sunday, like, without fail. And then I was doing that with them for like an entire year. It was kind of funny the way it started. It was like observatory, and we like did a digital plein air painting. And this is where I'd be like, dude, Chatty, like, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like sit over your shoulder and watch, but you know, I didn't know what else to do. I'd rather do that. So yeah, so we did that, and then through that I met Eitan, and I met John, Tony, Leanne, like all these artists who are working at all these other studios now, and we made this really, really cool friendship, you know. And I think I was like maybe 19 at the time, or 20. I met all these guys like when we were, you know, almost kids, I guess.
Yeah.
And you know, we're really, really good friends now. And so anyway, that year went by, and then I made a new portfolio, and thankfully the second time I got in, I was pretty happy about that. And I was at Art Center for 2 terms. It was like 1 year. And then during that summer, I was like, oh, well, you know, I mean, it's Art Center is pretty expensive too.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I had like a little bit of a scholarship. It was like maybe a third or a fourth that they were covering. But, you know, 2 semesters alone, it's already like, oh man, like, you know, tens of thousands.
Yeah, I know.
Like deep, you know, it's like, all right, you know, and so I was like, well, maybe I can try and like get a job during the summer, you know, like after the first 2 semesters, or 2 terms. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll put together a portfolio. And then Eitan gave me a call, and he was like, hey man, there's an opening at Naughty Dog. And I was like, he's like, I would highly recommend you make a new portfolio and, you know, and try out for it. And I was like, okay, you know, and like at the time, it's like, I didn't really think that it would happen, but I was like, okay, well, it's like, if I don't do it, then for sure I'm not gonna have the opportunity. So it's like, okay, well, let me get something together. So then I ended up going to the office at Art Center. You know, it's like this school that I waited like 3 years to get into, and I was like, I had to tell them that I wasn't gonna come back. So I already quit before I even like got the job or anything, because they had to know, because and I was going to lose my scholarship if you ever took like a term off. So
yeah.
so
That sucks. I hate that they do that.
Yeah.
so I was like, well, all or nothing. Like,
Yeah.
like I guess so. So like I went over there and I told them like, hey, I'm gonna take a leave of absence. And I was like, well, worst case scenario, I come back to school if it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I put that portfolio together in about 2 months or 3 months. I think it was from like, I don't know, like July to August or September. And then I think I was interviewed at Naughty Dog. I think it was like late September, early October. And
Awesome.
then thankfully, they liked the work, and I was called in for another interview, and thankfully, I was able to land it, and they were like, oh, like when can you start? I'm like, like what?
Well, right now I
Awesome.
just left school, so
I know.
Ready to go.
I was terrified when I was leaving school because, when you're at that age, it's like you don't know anything else.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if you guys experience the same
I mean,
thing.
we both left school.
Yeah.
So,
So
School,
you guys
it's like-
just because we just
probably
did
had
it.
the same exact experience,
Mhm.
right? And
it's terrifying. It's a terrifying
But
experience.
it's the best feeling once you did it and you're like, yeah, I like have control of like what I do. I don't
Yeah.
just have to go to school and like finish like the normal path that people always take.
Totally.
So.
And it was a good like kind of like life lesson, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't have to follow the track that everybody is following, and because it's like you almost prove it to yourself that it's like, oh yeah, like you said, you have control over your own life.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
like, that's right, I forgot, like I could still
Yeah,
do
you-
that.
Yeah.
It's like
Like even if your parents are mad at you or like your professors are disappointed, it's like, yeah, but I mean, if you fail, you failed, and it's just like you're learning how
Right.
to like pick
Yeah.
yourself back up, which I think on its own is like a life lesson that a lot
Totally.
of artists need to learn.
yeah.
So
And it was the right amount of pressure too, like on myself, where it was like, I can't let my parents down. I can't let myself down. Like, it's like I started something. I need to see it through. Like, I need to be able to support myself. It's like, and that was like the right amount of pressure I think I
Yeah.
needed to kind of push myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I had the same experience where I was going to school. I was in graduate school, and at a certain point, I was just like, this isn't for me. I hate it. And I just had to sort of grab the bull by the horns and just quit. And I just quit that day and never looked back. And since then, it's been, for me, the best decision of my life. I'm sure it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah.
But I think, going back to what we were saying, where you have to treat it like it's a full-time job, I think you can't do that if you're held back by university setting.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
hard because I mean, like at universities, all the accreditation that they need, it's like for them to be accredited, they have to provide certain classes that may or may not be relevant when you're working professionally.
Yeah.
And like when you're in school, it's like it's hard to focus on those classes and then also focus on the classes that actually really matter for what you're gonna end
Yeah.
up doing professionally. So it's hard to balance your time when even you're a full-time student at like a traditional university.
yeah.
Now, can I ask about, you mentioned when you took Shadi's class, that sort of set you in a different direction. Can you talk a little bit about what your art was looking like before that when you were drawing Johnny Depp's?
Yeah,
Johnny Depp.
yeah, exactly.
Just multiple.
And how that transitioned.
No, it was great because like when he was teaching the class, like my work was so bad. Like it was like when I was painting in color, like I thought the way to paint in color was like, okay, I got to do the black and white, and then I got to paint on top of it with like an overlay layer,
Yeah.
like a coloring book type of thing. And like I would look at the paintings, I'm like, why does it always look like burned or something? Like it looks like it just always looked really bad. And it wasn't until I took Shadi's class where he was like also just focusing, like maybe 80% of it was like making a good composition.
Yeah.
And that was something that composition was so elusive to me. It's like one of those concepts where you're like, I mean, it's like the design of the arrangement of the 2D canvas, but I didn't quite understand what that meant until Shadi, because Shadi, the way he taught it was he would focus a lot on the graphic design aspect of a 2D image. In terms of like he would only make us work in like two values. It was like only solid white or solid black, and solid black, not one.
Yeah. The entire canvas is just black.
So it's
Going back to
solid
modern
white.
art.
Yeah, exactly. Solid white and solid black. And it wasn't until then that I was like, oh, I see now. Like you're arranging like your lighting, or you're arranging like, you know, the placement of objects. And that really opened my eyes. And the way that I teach my class at Brainstorm still follows that kind of rough guideline, because it helped me so much. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because, like, I mean, everybody has a different way of learning, you know, and for me personally, it just it made more sense to me.
Yeah.
So, you know, that really opened my eyes to like just like painting environments, because that was one of the things that I had trouble with the most. And then
Yeah.
he was also the one to recommend, like, oh, you should paint outside, you know. And I was like, oh man, like if he said it, like I should probably do it.
Yeah.
And actually, so I started doing it. Like there was a park across the street from school, and I would take my laptop and I would just take it out to the park. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, I guess I'll just paint this tree, or I'll paint this like business building or this baseball field. And it wasn't until then that I was like, oh, okay. Because I didn't understand color yet. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'll just go do it from observation, and then actually start putting color on the canvas rather than doing black and white and then overlay, because I was so used to doing that. And it wasn't until I was kind of digital plein air painting that, you know, I finally was starting to understand how to
Yeah.
use the colors, you know. And it helped a ton.
I
So-
love that the shoddy setup for the digital plein air.
Yeah, the box, the TV box, the microwave.
Is that what you were doing? Is that what you're using? Or
Yeah.
Was
Well, at first it was just my laptop, and I would sit in the shade. And it wasn't until Shaddy was like, no, like you need to make this box. And I was like,
You need to construct a house for your
yeah, this voodoo box.
I love it. I love that thing. It's so
Yeah.
cool.
And so anyway, you know, I ended up making one, and, you know, we started mapping all our sort of shortcuts on the tablets. So
Yeah.
all the hotkeys were on the buttons on the side of the tablet
Okay.
that nobody uses. We started using, and just so that we don't have to like reach into the box when you're painting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like every time we would be out painting, like, you know, people were like, what are you guys doing? It's like,
What is that thing?
yeah, and like people give you the weirdest looks. And some people thought that we were just like watching TV outside. And it's like
I love it. I
like,
love
no,
it.
dude. You know?
bring an entire TV set with you.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
good.
I remember there was this woman who, like, we were at Eaton Canyon in Pasadena, and she's like, she's like, y'all are in nature. Like, why are you painting in this
The
box?
youths today.
That's so great.
I know, and she just couldn't understand, and it's like, it was quite the opposite. It was like, no, like, we're really appreciating this tree.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, we're like heavily focused on this rock.
Yeah, probably appreciating that rock more than anybody ever has before that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that rock has been sitting there for millions of years
And-
for
yeah.
some kid to be like, oh, wow, that's an interesting stain.
Yeah. That's cool though. I feel like one of the issues that digital artists or young digital artists have is that they don't get to go outside and study from real life. So that's one of the ways that I think it is a little ridiculous looking, but it's so helpful, and I'm sure it
Yeah.
helped you a lot when you were coming up.
No, totally. And just for the social experience too, because I mean, like, you'd get guests coming, you know, and it kind of like you know, kind of spread a little bit where it's like, oh, hey, you should come with us. And,
Yeah.
and you know, and like there were a lot of working professionals that were painting with us, and I was not in school at the time, and it was really cool to be around these people who probably otherwise wouldn't be around, you know,
Yeah.
if I weren't painting. And it was a good opportunity to like meet new people and, you know, get different perspectives on,
Yeah.
you know, different industries. There's some people from animation, there's some people from games, there's some people who are doing things for film. And it was really cool because it's like you're all painting, and, you know, while you're sitting there, you know, you kind of chat and like get to know each other. And I think that's a big part of it that, you know, a lot of people might like overlook is, you know, like it's okay to go out and like hang out with people and still be productive.
Yeah, definitely. How did you meet Aton? Was that from school, or was that from Naughty Dog?
That
or
was through Shaddy. So
Okay.
like a lot of the people that I know today came from that. And because Aton was working with Shaddy at Naughty Dog.
Okay, so he was already a professional at that point. and
Yeah,
then-
he had
okay.
just started working there. I think it was like 2010.
Yeah.
And I remember Aton came out to like draw, and I remember actually seeing his work on conceptart.org Like, and I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
maybe Otis is the place I should go to. And this was when I was at AI that
Yeah.
like I saw his work, and then when he came out, I was like, oh my god, that's the guy. Like he's the one.
He's the one.
Yeah. And anyway, we started drawing together, and we got to know each other, and like now we're really, really good friends. We're pretty close friends now. And
Awesome.
And then through Aton I met John Sweeney, who's also at Naughty Dog, and John was still at Otis at the time. And it was this thing. It just came out of like painting outside, and it was really cool. Like looking back now, I mean, back when we were doing it, it's like you don't really think anything of it, but then it's like, of course, like 8 years, looking 8 years down, it's like, wow, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and all those relationships have like, I don't know, they've really shaped your direction in which you're going. It's super
Totally.
cool. We have to take a quick commercial break.
Sure.
And then we'll chat about some more stuff.
Someone's working out upstairs. I just
Oh,
want to
man.
mention that.
That's okay.
I hope it's not like coming through on this.
It is a little bit, but it's not so bad. Anyway, for you listeners of the Modern Day Podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a 30-day free trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I don't know if you've heard of Amazon before, but they do own Audible. It's a really great website if you want to listen to some books. We've been listening to The Man in the High Castle.
And by listening, we mean
we're reading it
with our
actually.
eyes.
We're listening with our eyeballs. It's been quite
great
great. But I'm lying to you. I'm not using Audible to read Man in the High Castle, but they tell me that I'm supposed to tell you what I'm reading. So
and that's how you lose a sponsorship.
don't sue us, Audible or Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Also, Skillshare. Sign up for it. It's great. Marco Bucci, he's a wonderful painter. He's got some really cool plein air painting courses on there. Check it out. There's a bunch of other stuff you can learn. Just go on that website. It's a great place. Anyway, we're back with my man, Nick Gindraux. So far we've talked a lot about how you were coming up. Can you discuss a little bit about the life as a concept artist and what your day-to-day is like?
The day-to-day. I mean, before I started working at Naughty Dog, I was doing some freelance before that for smaller companies, and I actually worked for Shaddy for a few months, and which was good training, you know, because it was like, okay, well, you get direction from the art director, and then you sort of interpret it in your way, and then you show them, and then if they approve it, then it's done and you move on, and if it's not up to par, or if it's not the idea, then you edit it and then move on. So like that was good, like pre-training to the whole studio thing. But so like when I was at Naughty Dog, it would start with like an art director or the game director kind of coming to your desk and saying, oh, we need to redesign the ledges that Drake climbs on, and it's like
The rapper or the character?
Yeah, the rapper, of course. So like we would redesign, like, okay, well, the ledges, it's hard to see like where you grab, so it's like, okay, well, maybe like what's a good way to show you're supposed to climb on that where it's like not too obvious and not too too subtle. So it's like you kind of have to find the sweet spot. So it's like, okay, well, maybe birds have been sitting there, and maybe they leave some bird shit on the ledges, and it gives a lighter value or something like that. I mean, just as an example. And it's like, okay, well, that's one idea that makes it look natural, and at the same time it kind of stands out. I mean,